What does it take to make the sun disappear? Not an eclipse. Not a planetary alignment. What does it take for the source of all light and life in the universe to simply quit? To abandon its post, turn its back on the world, and plunge everything into a cold, permanent, and absolute darkness. This isn't a thought experiment. It's the core of a story that shaped an entire nation. A story where the end of the world wasn't caused by an asteroid or a supervolcano, but by a family dispute. A divine argument so terrible, so filled with grief and rage, that the sun itself decided humanity wasn't worth the trouble. And the most terrifying part? The gods who caused it are still worshipped today. So the question we have to ask is not just how they convinced the sun to return, but what secret, what cosmic leverage, did they use to lure light back into a world they had so thoroughly broken? The answer is one of the most bizarre and brilliant deceptions in all of mythology, and it begins long before the sun ever existed, in a time of pure, formless chaos. Before the earth, before the sky, there was only a vast, silent, oily sea of nothingness, an ocean of potential. From this chaos, the first gods, the Koto Amaterasu, emerged and then vanished, like thoughts in a sleeping mind. They were concepts, not creatures. But then reality began to take shape. Heaven and earth separated, and from the reeds that grew in the space between, more generations of gods were born. The last of these were a brother and a sister, a divine pair destined to build the world we know. His name was Izanagi, the he who invites. Her name was Izanami, the she who invites. Standing on the floating bridge of heaven, they looked down at the endless churning brine below. They were given a task and a tool to complete it, a single jewel-encrusted spear. Together they dipped the spear into the chaos and stirred. They stirred and stirred until the primordial soup thickened. And when they lifted the spear, the drops of salty chaos that fell from its tip did not dissolve back into the ocean. They solidified. They became the first island, Onagoro, the first solid ground in a universe of liquid. They descended to this new island and built a pillar to the heavens. Here they would perform the first marriage ritual. They circled the pillar in opposite directions, and when they met, Izanami, the goddess, spoke first. "What a handsome man you are," she said. Izanagi replied in kind, and they performed their union. But their first child was a disaster. It was born boneless, a deformed leech child, and they cast it out to sea in a boat of reeds. Their second child was also malformed. Confused, they returned to the heavens and asked the elder gods what they had done wrong. The answer was simple: a breach of cosmic protocol. The woman, the female principal, had spoken first. It was a fatal error in the divine order. So they returned to the island and performed the ritual again. They circled the pillar, and this time Izanagi, the male god, spoke first. "What a beautiful woman you are." This time the union was perfect. From their marriage, the islands of Japan were born one by one. They gave birth to the gods of the wind, the trees, the mountains, and the rivers. They were creating a world teeming with life and divinity. They were the perfect divine couple, architects of a new reality. But their creation myth was about to become a horror story, for their final child would be their undoing. In giving birth to the god of fire, Kagutsuchi, Izanami was horrifically burned. Her body was scorched by the very essence of her newborn son. As she lay dying, even her tears and vomit gave birth to new gods of metal and clay. But it wasn't enough to save her. She perished, descending to the one place even the gods feared. Yomi, the land of the dead, the underworld. Izanagi was broken. His grief was a force of nature. In a blind rage, he drew his 10-span sword and beheaded his own son, the newborn fire god who had killed his mother. But even this act of vengeance created more gods, born from the blood that splattered his sword and the rocks around him. The world was now filled with his divine children, but it was empty. The love of his life, his other half, was gone, and he refused to accept it. He did what so many heroes and so many myths have tried to do. He decided to cheat death. He journeyed to the edge of the world and found the entrance to Yomi, a dark, gaping maw leading into eternal twilight. He descended into the oppressive gloom, a world of shadows and decay, and called out her name. "Izanami, my love, the world we were building is not yet finished. Come back with me." From the impenetrable darkness, her voice answered, faint and hollow. "My beloved husband, it is too late. I have already eaten the food of the underworld. I cannot return." This was the law. To partake in the sustenance of Yomi was to be bound to it forever. But, she continued, since you have come all this way for me, I will try. I will go and speak with the lords of this land. But you must promise me one thing. You must not look at me. Do not try to see me until I return. Izanagi agreed. He waited and waited. The silence and the darkness of the underworld pressed in on him. An eternity seemed to pass. His patience, his hope began to curdle into suspicion and dread. Why was it taking so long? What was she hiding? Finally, he could bear it no longer. He broke a tooth from the sacred comb in his hair and lit it. The tiny flame pierced the suffocating blackness, and he saw her. The scream that caught in his throat was one of pure, soul-shattering terror. The beautiful goddess he had married, the mother of his children, was gone. In her place was a rotting, decomposing corpse. Her flesh was sloughing off her bones, infested with maggots that wriggled and squirmed in the flickering torchlight. And born from the decay of her body were 8 new, horrifying deities, the gods of thunder, their monstrous forms clinging to her decomposing flesh. Izanami, seeing his revulsion, shrieked in shame and fury. You have shamed me. You broke your promise. Her rage was absolute. She commanded the Shikome, the hags of the underworld, to hunt him down. Izanagi turned and fled, the torchlight casting frantic shadows on the cavern walls as the monstrous crones gained on him. He threw his headdress behind him, and it transformed into a bunch of grapes, which the hags immediately stopped to devour. He fled further. As they caught up again, he threw his sacred comb, which instantly sprouted into a thick forest of bamboo shoots, slowing them down. But Izanami was relentless. She sent the 8 thunder gods and an army of 1,500 warriors of Yomi after him. He fought them off with his sword as he ran for his life, scrambling back towards the light, back towards the world of the living. He finally reached the entrance and found a boulder so massive it would take 1,000 men to move. With the last of his strength, he rolled it into the entrance of Yomi, sealing the underworld shut just as his pursuers reached him. From the other side of the rock, he heard her voice, no longer his wife's, but a curse-given form. "My husband!" she screamed, her voice dripping with the venom of betrayal. "Because you have done this, I will strangle to death 1,000 of the people in your land every single day." Izanagi, panting, his heart a drum of terror and grief, shouted back through the stone, "My beloved wife! If you do that, then I will ensure that 1,500 birthing huts are built every day." It was the first divorce, a divine breakup that established the eternal cycle of life and death. For every 1,000 souls she would claim for the darkness, he would ensure 1,500 more were born into the light. But Izanagi was now unclean. He was tainted by death, by the horrors he had witnessed in the land of shadows. To cleanse himself, he went to a river and began a ritual of purification. He washed the filth of the underworld from his body and his clothes, and with every item he discarded, a new god was born. But the most important creations were yet to come. As he washed the final traces of Yomi from his face, 3 of the most powerful and important deities in all of Japanese mythology sprang into existence. When he washed his left eye, a goddess of radiant, unparalleled brilliance was born. Amaterasu Omikami, the great goddess who shines in the heavens, the sun itself. When he washed his right eye, a god of pale, serene light emerged. Tsukuyumi no Mikoto, the god of the moon and the night. And when he washed his nose, a god of raw, violent, and unpredictable power burst forth. Takaya Susanoo no Mikoto, the god of storms and the sea. To his children Izanagi gave their domains. To Tsukuyumi the kingdom of the night. To the volatile Susanoo the oceans. And to his most beloved daughter Amaterasu, he gave his sacred bead necklace and a divine mandate. Rule the heavens. Rule the day. Be the light for all creation. She was born from a father fleeing the ultimate darkness. She was created as the very antidote to the rot and decay of the underworld. Her entire purpose was to be the unwavering, life-giving light that held the shadows at bay. Which brings us back to our central, terrifying question. What could possibly happen that would cause this goddess, the very embodiment of light and order, to abandon her sacred duty, to turn her back on the world, and lock herself away in a cave of stone? What could be so terrible that the sun would rather die than see it? The answer wasn't in the darkness she was born from. It was in the brother who was born right alongside her. A storm was brewing, and it was coming for the sun. His name was Susanoo no Mikoto. While Amaterasu was born from the purity of a left eye, a symbol of honor and light, Susanoo was born from the washing of a nose, a place of grit, of breath, of raw, unfiltered life. And from his very first moment he was not like his sister. He was not a gentle dawn, he was a tempest. His first act was not to illuminate, but to weep. And his weeping was not a quiet sorrow, it was a force of nature. The great father Izanagi looked upon his three divine children, the radiant Amaterasu, the serene Tsukuyami, and the roaring Susanoo. He saw in them the new order of the cosmos. He gave Amaterasu dominion over the Takamagara, the high plane of heaven. She was to be the ruler of gods, the source of order, the light of the universe. To Tsukuyami, her quiet brother, he gave the realm of the night, a kingdom of silver and shadow. And to Susanoo, the wailing, wild-hearted god, he gave the great expanse of the sea, the endless, churning, unpredictable ocean. It was a fitting domain for a god of such emotion. But Susanoo did not want the sea. He did not want a kingdom to rule. He wanted his mother. He longed for Izanami, the mother he had never met, the goddess now trapped in Yomi, the land of the dead. He rejected his father's divine decree, and instead he cried. He cried with such earth-shattering force that the mountains withered and the rivers ran dry. His beard grew long down to his waist, but he did not stop. His grief was a weapon, a cataclysm that shook the very foundations of the mortal world. Forests died, plagues spread, and the green earth began to turn gray under the shadow of his sorrow. He was a god of tantrums and typhoons, and his refusal to accept his destiny was unmaking the world his father had just purified. Izanagi, seeing the destruction wrought by his own son, was filled with a righteous fury. This was not divine sorrow, this was rebellion, this was chaos. He confronted Susanoo, his voice like the cracking of stone. "Why do you neglect the kingdom I have given you?" he demanded. "Why do you bring ruin to the world with your endless wailing?" And Susanoo, through his tears, finally spoke his heart. "I do not wish to rule the sea," he roared. "I wish to go to the land of my mother, to be with her in the underworld." This was the final straw. To long for the land of the dead, the realm of pollution and decay from which Izanagi had just barely escaped, was an ultimate act of defiance. It was an insult to the very concept of life and purity. Izanagi's patience shattered. He declared Susanoo banished, cut off, exiled. He was to be cast out from the celestial family, a god without a home. But how do you banish a storm? Where do you send a hurricane to think about what it's done? Before leaving for his exile, Susanoo made a request. "I will obey your command," he said to his father. "But first, I must ascend to the high plane of heaven to say farewell to my elder sister Amaterasu." Was this a final heartfelt plea for connection? A moment of clarity in the heart of the storm? Or was it something else? The first move in a celestial chess game? Up in the heavens, Amaterasu felt his approach. The very air grew heavy, the light seemed to flicker, and the ground of her perfect kingdom trembled. This was not the gentle ascent of a peaceful god. This was the charge of an army. She knew her brother. She knew his wildness, his rage, his capacity for destruction. She did not see a sibling coming to say goodbye. She saw a usurper, a rival coming to conquer her kingdom, to extinguish her light and claim her throne. And so the goddess of the sun prepared for war. She tied up her hair into warriors' knots. She wrapped her arms in long strings of sacred beads. She slung a 1,000-arrow quiver to her back and a 500-arrow quiver to her side. In her hands she held a mighty bow, its string humming with tension. She stamped her feet into the heavenly soil with such force that it flew like powdered snow. She let out a ferocious cry, a warrior's challenge that echoed across the celestial plains. She was not just the sun. She was its fire, its fury, its unblinking burning heart. Susanoo arrived at the banks of the tranquil river of heaven and saw his sister, armed and ready for battle. "Why do you meet me like this, my sister?" he called out, his voice a low thunder. "Why do you come here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and clear as glass. "Your heart is not pure. You come to steal my kingdom." "No," Susanoo insisted. "My heart is pure. I have no ill intentions. I was banished by our father, and I came only to bid you farewell before I depart for the land of Yomi. If you do not believe me, then let us prove our sincerity with an oath, a trial." He proposed in Yuki a trial by pledge. They would each take an object belonging to the other and from it, bring forth new gods. The nature of the children born from this ritual would reveal the true nature of their hearts. If Susanoo's intentions were violent and aggressive, the gods he birthed would reflect that. If his heart was pure, his offspring would be noble. Amaterasu, ever the diplomat, the seeker of harmony, agreed. Perhaps a part of her wanted to believe him. Perhaps she simply saw this as the only way to avoid a devastating war in her sacred home. The trial began. Amaterasu asked for her brother's sword, the 10-span blade he wore at his side. She took the massive weapon, broke it into 3 pieces, and rinsed them in the true well of heaven. As she crunched the pieces in her mouth, a mist arose, and from that mist 3 beautiful and serene goddesses were born. Now it was Susanoo's turn. He asked for the long string of Magatama beads that Amaterasu wore in her hair. He took the 500-bead strand, rinsed it in the well, and cracked them between his teeth. And from the mist of his breath, 5 powerful and noble male gods were born. The trial was over. The divine children stood before them. But who had won? Who had proven their sincerity? Susanoo looked at the new gods and roared with triumph. "I am victorious," he declared. "For the children I have created are graceful male gods. And because the children born from your own beads are male, it proves my heart is pure and free of selfish intent." The logic was twisted, a self-serving interpretation designed to grant him victory no matter the outcome. He had taken her gentle, feminine-associated beads and produced strong, masculine gods, and in his mind, this was absolute proof of his pure, masculine power and sincerity. It made no real sense, but it was declared with the force of a tidal wave. And Amaterasu, the brilliant sun, the wise ruler, she accepted it. Perhaps she was weary of the conflict. Perhaps she was relieved to have avoided bloodshed. Or perhaps, in a moment of familial hope, she chose to believe the best of her wild, unpredictable brother. She lowered her bow. She conceded his victory. She had seen the evidence, heard the claim, and made a ruling. She let the storm in. And as Susanoo stepped across the tranquil river of heaven, a triumphant smirk on his face, the sky above the celestial plain began to darken, not with the coming of night, but with the shadow of a promise about to be broken. The greatest mistake of her eternal life had just been made, and the price for it would be the light of the entire world. Susanoo, god of the sea and storms, did not ascend to the high plane of heaven like a guest. He arrived like a tremor. The very air, usually still and fragrant with celestial blossoms, grew heavy and thick with the smell of salt and ozone. The ground shook with his thunderous steps. He wasn't just visiting. He was invading. And Amaterasu, in her infinite grace, her boundless optimism, saw a brother in need. She saw a tempest that needed calming, a wild heart that needed a home. She chose to see his destructive power as simple, untamed passion, a misunderstanding. But what's a little mud between siblings, right? His first act wasn't a grand declaration of war. It was petty. It was childish. Amaterasu had laid out the celestial rice paddies, her pride and joy. These weren't just fields. They were perfect geometric expressions of order and abundance, their irrigation channels like silver veins carrying life to the sacred grain. Susanoo, in a fit of what she told herself was just boisterous energy, stomped through them. He kicked down the dividers, letting the water run wild, turning the pristine fields into a chaotic, muddy swamp. The other gods were aghast. This was a direct insult to the goddess of the sun, the very symbol of cosmic order. Amaterasu saw their worried faces, and she waved it away with a practiced smile. "He meant no harm," she explained, perhaps trying to convince herself as much as them. "He probably thought the fields were too dry. He was just helping." She even claimed that he must have been drunk, that the heavenly sake was too strong for his earthly palate. She was the older sister, the responsible one. She would clean up his mess. She would smooth things over. Because that's what family does. They forgive. They make excuses. They absorb the blows to keep the peace. But Susanoo wasn't just making a mess. He was testing her. He was pushing the boundaries to see how far they would bend before they broke. His next act was more deliberate, a clear escalation. During the Sacred Harvest Festival, a time of immense joy and reverence, Amaterasu was to preside over the ceremonial first taste of the new rice. The great hall was decorated, the gods were assembled, the air hummed with anticipation, and just as the offerings were being made, Susanoo, in an act of profound disrespect, snuck into the hall and defecated under the sacred throne. He smeared the filth across the walls of the feasting palace. The stench was one thing, the sacrilege was another. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't drunken revelry. This was a calculated desecration. It was an act of pure contempt, aimed directly at the heart of everything Amaterasu represented: purity, order, and sanctity. The other gods were no longer just worried, they were furious. They demanded she cast him out. This beast had no place in their perfect sunlit world. And still she defended him. Her voice was tighter now, her smile a little more brittle, but she held the line. He didn't understand, she insisted. He thought it was a game. He is a god of the wild places, of the untamed earth. He doesn't comprehend our customs. She was running out of excuses, the fabric of her patience wearing thin. She was the sun, the source of all light and reason, and yet she was blinding herself to the darkness festering in her own family. She was choosing to believe the lie because the truth was simply too monstrous to contemplate. That her brother, her own flesh and blood, was not just chaotic. He was evil. The breaking point when it came was not a slow crack but a violent, world-shattering explosion. It happened in the one place Amaterasu felt truly safe, her most sacred sanctuary, the Hall of Weaving. Here, with her most trusted attendants, she wove the garments of the gods. The rhythmic clack of the looms was the sound of creation itself, the threads a metaphor for the interconnectedness of the cosmos. It was a place of peace, of focus, of divine creation. Outside, Susanoo was raging. His fury, no longer content with petty vandalism, had turned bloodthirsty. He found one of the magnificent heavenly horses, creatures of pure light and spirit, that grazed in the celestial fields. With a roar that shook the foundations of heaven, he flayed the creature alive. He ripped its skin from its body in a single gruesome sheet. Then, he climbed to the roof of the sacred weaving hall. Inside, Amaterasu was at her loom, her hands moving with a grace that could calm storms and coax flowers from stone. Her attendants worked beside her, their quiet humming a peaceful counterpoint to the clatter of the shuttles. They were so absorbed in their work, in the serene beauty of their craft, that they didn't hear him. They didn't see the shadow that fell over the roof. With another bellow of pure malice, Susanoo punched a hole through the thatched roof and hurled the bloody, skinless carcass of the horse down into the hall. The world dissolved into chaos. The sacred space was instantly violated, splattered with blood and gore. The air filled with the coppery stench of death. The attendants screamed, scrambling away from the horrific sight. But one of them, in her panic and terror, stumbled. Her hand flew out, and in a tragic, fatal accident, the sharp point of her wooden weaving shuttle pierced her own body. She collapsed to the floor, dead, in a pool of her own blood mixed with that of the desecrated horse. Silence. The clatter of the looms stopped. The screaming stopped. All that remained was the sight of her loyal friend, her devoted servant, lying lifeless on the floor of their sanctuary. And Amaterasu broke. This was not something she could explain away. This was not a drunken mistake. This was not a cultural misunderstanding. This was murder. This was a violation so profound, so personal, so soaked in blood and betrayal, that it extinguished something inside of her. The warmth she had so freely given to the universe, the boundless optimism, the patient love for her wayward brother. It all curdled into ice-cold terror and grief. She looked at the carnage. She looked at the body of her friend. And she saw the face of her brother, not as the passionate storm god, but as a monster. A monster she had invited into her home. A monster she had defended. The guilt and the horror were a physical weight, crushing the breath from her lungs. She didn't scream. She didn't rage. She didn't seek vengeance. She fled. She ran from the hall, blind with tears, her golden light flickering like a guttering candle. She ran from the cries of the other gods, from the sight of her defiled temple, from the ghost of her brother's laughter that seemed to echo in the wind. She ran from her duty, from her throne, from her very identity as the sun. All she wanted was a place to hide, a place where the blood and the betrayal and the memory of that shuttle could not find her. And there, at the edge of the celestial plane, she found it. A deep, dark cave set into the living rock of heaven, the Ama-no-Iwato, the heavenly rock cave. Without a second thought, Driven by an agony too deep for words, she scrambled inside, into the cold, silent darkness. And with the last of her divine strength, she pulled a colossal boulder across the entrance, sealing herself in. From the outside, the other gods could only watch in horror as the last sliver of golden light, the source of all life and warmth in the universe, was swallowed by the stone. And then nothing. For the first time since the dawn of creation, the high plane of heaven, and all the worlds below it, were plunged into a total, absolute, and terrifying darkness. Imagine a switch being flipped, not for a room but for reality itself. One moment, the golden light of heaven bathes everything in warmth and life. The next, a profound, bottomless black. This wasn't the gentle dark of twilight, or the star-dusted velvet of a peaceful night. This was an aggressive, suffocating void. Pressure on the eyes. A silence so deep it roared in the ears of the gods. For a few heartbeats there was only stunned stillness. The 800 myriad deities of the high plane of heaven, frozen in disbelief. Then came the confusion. A single panicked voice, then another, then 1,000, 1,000,000, rising in a cacophony of fear. Gods who could stride across galaxies now stumbled into each other, their divine sight useless. The air, once warm and fragrant with celestial blossoms, grew instantly unnaturally cold. A chill that didn't just bite at the skin, but seemed to sink deep into the bones, into the very spirit. It was the cold of the grave, the cold of non-existence. Below, on the central land of reed plains, the world of mortals, the effect was catastrophic. Farmers in their fields looked up from their work, their faces turning from the sun to a sky that had become a featureless, terrifying slate. The warmth vanished from the air in a single stolen breath. The vibrant green of the rice paddies seemed to gray and wither before their very eyes. Photosynthesis, the quiet, constant miracle that fueled all life, simply stopped. And in the sudden, permanent night, things began to stir. Creatures of shadow, malevolent spirits and demons, the oni, the yokai, that had always been kept at bay by the purifying light of the sun, now found their cages unlocked. They crept from murky rivers, slithered out from deep caves, and rose from forgotten burial mounds. A wave of evil, a tide of malice was unleashed upon the world. The cries of mortals joined the panicked shouts of the gods, a symphony of terror echoing through a universe that had lost its heart. Back in the heavens, the blame game began. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a hot, furious anger. And every divine finger, every enraged accusation, pointed in one direction. Susanoo. This was his doing. His rage, his sacrilege, his monstrous defilement of his sister's sacred halls had driven her into hiding. He had not just offended the sun goddess. He had effectively murdered the sun itself. The gods searched for him, their voices raw with fury, but he was already gone, banished, cast out, leaving behind a cosmos in chaos as his final terrible legacy. But knowing who to blame didn't bring back the light. The darkness persisted. Days, if you could even call them that, bled into one another in an endless twilight of despair. The divine order began to fray. Without the sun to mark the passage of time, the very concept of morning and evening dissolved. The universe was adrift. The gods, for all their power, were creatures of order and light. In this eternal gloom, their own divinity began to feel thin. Their powers waned. The vibrant colors of their heavenly robes seemed dull and lifeless. The high plane of heaven, once a paradise of impossible beauty, was becoming a cold, gray, terrifying purgatory. The situation was unsustainable. The universe was dying. The fabric of reality, woven with the threads of light and order, was unraveling stitch by stitch. The gods realized that anger and despair were luxuries they could no longer afford. Action was needed, and so a call went out, not by light but by voice, passed from one desperate god to another through the oppressive dark. A call for a grand council. They gathered by the banks of the tranquil river of heaven, the Ama-no-Iwato river, its waters now black and inert, reflecting nothing. It wasn't a grand, orderly procession. It was a frantic, desperate assembly. The 800 myriad gods, a number meaning countless, a congress of every divine being in existence, huddled together for warmth and for hope. Their combined voices were a low, anxious hum, a stark contrast to the joyous songs that usually filled the celestial plains. They were a pantheon on the brink of collapse. Who could lead them? Who possessed the insight to solve a problem of this magnitude? The brute force of a warrior god was useless against a locked stone door. The fertility of an earth god couldn't make crops grow in a world without light. They needed something more. They needed a mind capable of thinking its way out of the apocalypse. And in that huddle of divine desperation, a name was whispered: Omikami, the god of wisdom and deliberation, the child of Takama Masubi, one of the primordial creators. Omikami was not a god of grand, flashy power. He didn't command lightning or shake the earth. His power was quieter, deeper. It was said that his mind contained all the knowledge of the universe, that he could hold countless thoughts at once, weighing every possibility, every outcome, every intricate detail of a plan. When the gods faced a problem that couldn't be solved with a sword or a spell, they turned to him. And there had never ever been a problem like this. He was brought to the center of the shivering assembly. In the crushing dark, you couldn't see his face, but you could feel the immense, focused weight of his presence. The panic chatter of the gods died down, replaced by a desperate, hopeful silence. They leaned in, every deity from the most powerful creator to the smallest local spirit, straining to hear what the god of wisdom would say. Omikami did not speak for a long time. He simply stood, absorbing the cold, the darkness, the fear. He processed the problem in its totality. A grieving goddess, a sealed cave, a dying universe. He considered force. But the heavenly rock cave was no ordinary cave, and Amaterasu's grief was no ordinary sorrow. Trying to blast the door open would be a fool's errand. It would only insult her further, driving her deeper into her stony exile. He considered pleading, begging for her to return. But her heart was wounded too deeply. Words of apology would be meaningless until the source of the wound, Susanoo, was dealt with. And he was already gone. No, this problem couldn't be solved with force or with simple words. It required something far more elegant, something far more human. He needed a plan that didn't attack the stone door, but addressed the wounded heart hiding behind it. He needed a strategy born not of power but of psychology. The assembled gods held their collective breath. The fate of all creation rested on this one being's ability to formulate a plan. The cold deepened, the silence stretched. And then, within the fathomless mind of Omikami, the gears began to turn. He sifted through every trick, every piece of knowledge, every story ever told. And he found an idea so counterintuitive, so audacious, so utterly strange, that it defied all conventional divine logic. It was a plan that relied on laughter in a time of weeping, on celebration in a world of despair. It was a beautiful, ridiculous, and incredibly dangerous gamble, and it was their only hope. So they gathered, not with swords and shields, not with thunderbolts and divine pronouncements, but with a strange and desperate collection of props. They came to the mouth of the heavenly rock cave, this gaping wound in the side of the world, and the eternal twilight made them seem like ghosts. The chill wasn't just from the lack of sun. It was a bone-deep cold, the cold of a universe that had lost its heart. First, they brought forth a great sakiki tree, a sacred plant with deep green, glossy leaves, and placed it before the stone that sealed the cave. Its branches reached out like skeletal fingers in the gloom. Then they began to decorate it. From one of the highest branches, they hung a magnificent mirror, the Yata no Kagami, polished to such a perfect sheen that it seemed to hold a sliver of a long-forgotten daylight within its bronze depths. On another branch, they draped the Yasakani no Magatama, a string of 500 kama-shaped jewels that shimmered faintly, catching what little ambient light remained in the cosmos. These were objects of immense power, not weapons but symbols of truth and the soul. And then came the final, almost comical piece of the puzzle. They gathered the long-crowing roosters of Tokoyo, the eternal land, and set them near the cave entrance. In the oppressive silence, the birds were quiet, their natural instinct to greet the dawn utterly suppressed by the unending night. They were a silent, feathered promise of a morning that might never come. The stage was set. The gods and goddesses, an assembly of the most powerful beings in existence, stood huddled together, their divine breath misting in the cold air. They looked lost. They looked defeated. All their power, all their wisdom, was useless against a locked stone door and a broken heart. They turned their gaze to the one chosen to lead this bizarre ceremony. Her name was Ama-no-Iwato, the goddess of the dawn, of mirth, and of revelry. She was not a warrior queen like Amaterasu, nor a fearsome storm god like Susanoo. Her power wasn't in commanding the elements, but in commanding emotion. She was the divine spark of joy, the force of life that bubbles up in laughter and dance. And in this moment of absolute despair, the fate of reality rested on her ability to throw a party. She looked at the faces of her fellow deities, etched with fear and sorrow. She saw the darkness that had consumed their world, and she knew that a simple dance wouldn't be enough. This couldn't be a performance of grace or elegance. It had to be a shock, a jolt to the system. It needed to be so loud, so audacious, so profoundly and beautifully absurd that it could shatter the grief that held the universe hostage. Ama-no-Iwato began by taking a large wooden tub, a sounding board, and flipping it upside down on the ground before the cave. It landed with a hollow boom that echoed unnaturally in the silence. The sound made the other gods flinch. Then she climbed atop it. She bound up her sleeves with a cord of heavenly vine, took sacred branches in her hands, and she began to stomp. First it was just a rhythm, a simple, heavy beat pounded out by her feet on the resonant wood. Thump, thump, thump. It was a defiant heartbeat in a dying world. The gods watched, their expressions a mixture of confusion and pity. What was this? How could this possibly work? But Ama-no-Iwato wasn't performing for them. She was channeling something primal. The rhythm grew faster, more complex. Her stomping became a frantic, percussive roar that filled the clearing. She was possessed by a divine fire, a spirit of pure, unadulterated life. She became a whirlwind of motion, her hair flying, the branches in her hands a blur. Then she began to disrobe. This wasn't an act of seduction. It was an act of rebellion, an act of raw, untamed, and shocking joy. In a world cloaked in shadow and propriety, she revealed herself, not as a goddess in her finery, but as a force of nature. She cast off the layers of divinity, the layers of sorrow, and she danced with an abandon that was both scandalous and sacred. And the gods, they started to laugh. It began as a nervous titter from one of the younger goddesses, quickly stifled, then a gruff chuckle from a hardened god of the mountains. But as Ama-no-Iwato's dance grew wilder, more ridiculous, more joyfully profane, the scattered sounds of amusement began to swell. The sight was just too much. The sheer, unmitigated absurdity of it all. The darkness, the cold, the end of the world, and this one goddess, dancing her heart out on an overturned bucket as if it were the greatest celebration in history. It broke through their despair. The nervous chuckles became full-bellied laughs. The laughs turned into roars of helpless hysterics. Gods and goddesses, beings of immense dignity and power, were doubled over, clutching their sides, tears of mirth streaming down their faces. They howled. They stamped their own feet in time with her beat. The sound of 800 myriads of gods all laughing at once was not a gentle sound. It was a cataclysm. It was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a sound that shook the high plane of heaven to its very foundations. The sakiki tree trembled, its jewels rattling. The ground vibrated. The silent roosters, startled by the deafening, joyous cacophony, suddenly let out a series of piercing, triumphant crows, as if greeting a dawn they could not see but could now, finally, feel. Inside the cave, Amaterasu sat in absolute, self-imposed darkness. The silence had been her companion, a blanket for her grief. But now that silence was shattered. She heard the noise. At first, it was a distant, confusing rumble. She tried to ignore it, to sink back into the quiet misery she had chosen. But it grew louder. What was that sound? It wasn't the sound of weeping or pleading, which she had half expected. It wasn't the sound of anger or battle. It sounded happy. It sounded like a festival. Amaterasu frowned, her divine brow furrowing in the blackness. How could this be? She had plunged the world into eternal night. The crops would be failing, the cold would be setting in. The universe was supposed to be in mourning for her, sharing in her pain. And yet, the beings outside were celebrating. They were laughing. And not just laughing. They were roaring with a kind of joy she hadn't heard in ages. The sheer injustice of it pricked at her pride. The nerve of them. To be so happy when she, their son, was so miserable. What could possibly be so amusing? What could be happening in the world, a world she had abandoned, that was more entertaining, more worthy of attention, than her own profound sorrow? The sound of the laughter was now a physical force, pressing in on the stone door of the cave, seeping through the cracks. It was infectious. It was infuriating. And, most dangerously of all, it was intriguing. A tiny, treacherous seed of curiosity began to sprout in the barren soil of her grief. What in all of creation could make the gods laugh like that? What in all of creation could make the gods laugh like that? Laughter was a language she hadn't spoken, hadn't even heard in an age. It was a relic of a world that no longer existed, a world that had light. Her world was stone silence, and the hollow echo of her own breathing. This sound, it was an invasion, a violation of her sacred misery. At first, it was just a murmur, a distant ripple of mirth she could dismiss. But it grew. It swelled from a chuckle to a guffaw, from a titter to a roar. It was a tidal wave of joy, crashing against the stone door of her tomb, and the vibrations were shaking the very foundations of her resolve. Outside, the gods were not just laughing. They were desperate. They had tried everything. They had pleaded. They had reasoned. They had threatened. They had offered apologies and tributes. Nothing worked. The world was dying. The crops withered in the perpetual twilight. The air grew thin and cold, and the very spirit of life was fading into a gray, hopeless miasma. Evil spirits and malevolent forces, once kept at bay by the sun's righteous glare, now crept from the shadows, growing bolder with every passing moment of darkness. The celestial plane was on the brink of collapse, and its inhabitants were staring into the abyss. In the midst of this divine panic, one god remained calm. Omikami, the god of wisdom and intelligence, a being whose mind moved like a river, flowing around obstacles and finding the path of least resistance. While others shouted, he thought. He understood that you couldn't argue with grief. You couldn't reason with despair. It was an emotional fortress immune to logic. You couldn't break the door down with force. No, you had to trick the prisoner into opening it herself. He gathered the 8 million gods and laid out a plan. It was audacious. It was absurd. It was to some deeply disrespectful. But it was also brilliant. It was a plan that didn't target Amaterasu's sense of duty, but her sense of self, her pride, her curiosity. The first part of the plan required a new creation. The finest smiths among the gods were summoned. They were tasked with forging an object of impossible perfection. A mirror. But not just any mirror. This would be the Yata no Kagami, the 8-hand mirror. They gathered sacred iron from the celestial mountains, smelted it in a fire kindled by the divine feminine and masculine, and hammered it into shape. With every strike they chanted prayers, weaving magic into the metal. They polished its surface not with cloth, but with the dust of diamonds and the light of distant stars, until it was so flawless it didn't just reflect an image, it seemed to hold a piece of the soul. It was a trap, a beautiful, perfect trap designed to catch the most powerful force in the universe, a goddess's own radiance. The second part of the plan required a performer, someone with no shame, no fear, and a spirit as bright and untamable as a wildfire. There was only one choice. Ama-no-Iwato, the goddess of the dawn of mirth and of revelry. She was the divine spark of life, the embodiment of joy. While others despaired, she danced. So they gathered before the cave. Omikami placed the sacred mirror in the branches of a tree, facing the stone door. He had roosters brought, whose crows were meant to signal the dawn, hoping the familiar sound might stir the goddess within. Then he gave the signal. Ama-no-Iwato took center stage. She overturned a large wooden tub, creating a makeshift drum, a hollow platform that would amplify every movement. And she began to dance. Inside the cave, the laughter was now punctuated by a new sound, a rhythmic, thunderous stomping. Boom, boom, boom. It was a heartbeat, a powerful, primal, insistent beat that seemed to resonate not in her ears, but in her bones. It was the sound of life, raw and unfiltered. Amaterasu pressed her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block it out. The beat was inside her, a phantom pulse in a world that had none. Outside, Ama-no-Iwato's dance grew wilder. She was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of silk and skin. She kicked her feet, she shook her hair. She moved with an abandon that was both sacred and scandalous. She was celebrating the body, celebrating existence, in the face of total annihilation. It was an act of profound defiance. As she danced, she began to disrobe. She cast off her sashes, her robes, her adornments piece by piece, her movements growing more frenzied, more hypnotic. This was not a performance of seduction. It was a performance of pure, unadulterated life force. A shocking, hilarious, and utterly captivating spectacle. The gods, at first confused, were soon caught up in the energy. Their nervous titters turned into genuine belly laughs. Their despair was momentarily forgotten, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated joy of the moment. They began to cheer, to clap, to roar with an earth-shattering, heaven-shaking laughter that dwarfed everything that had come before. This wasn't polite chuckling. This was the sound of 8 million divine beings absolutely losing their minds with hysterical glee. Inside the cave, Amaterasu was stunned. The noise was now a physical force. The rhythmic stomping, the deafening cheers, and above all, that impossible explosive laughter. What was happening? Had they all gone mad? Had they appointed a new sun goddess? Were they celebrating? Celebrating her absence? Celebrating the end of the world? The arrogance, the sheer, infuriating audacity. Her grief, which had been a cold, heavy blanket, was now shot through with sparks of white-hot anger. But beneath the anger, that treacherous seed of curiosity was now a full-grown vine, wrapping its tendrils around her heart. The sounds from outside painted a picture her mind couldn't comprehend. It was a paradox. The world was supposed to be weeping in darkness, begging for her return. Instead, it sounded like the greatest party the heavens had ever known. She had to know. Her sorrow screamed at her to stay put. Her pride demanded she ignore them. But the mystery was too great. The sound was too compelling. It was a siren song of life calling to her from across the shore of her self-imposed death. She crawled through the darkness, her limbs stiff from disuse. She reached the great stone door, the barrier between her world of gray and their world of whatever that joyous chaos was. Her hand, pale and trembling, pressed against the cold, rough surface. She could feel the vibrations of the stomping, the energy of the laughter, pulsing through the rock, a message in a language she had almost forgotten. She told herself it was just for a moment, just a peek, just enough to understand the madness that had gripped the heavens. With a grunt of effort that felt monumental, she pushed. The stone, sealed for an eternity, resisted. It was impossibly heavy, weighted down by her own despair. But her curiosity gave her a strength she didn't know she had. Slowly, painstakingly, a grinding sound echoed in the small space, the sound of rock scraping rock. A sliver of space opened up, crack, just wide enough for a single eye to peer through. She pressed her face to the opening, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm that for the first time almost matched the one outside. She held her breath and looked out from the darkness into the light. What she saw made no sense. It was a lie, a trick of the eyes, a phantom of sound. The world she had left behind was supposed to be a husk, silent, frozen, weeping in the gloom she had cast upon it. But this was a party, a full-throated, earth-shaking, riotous celebration. Through the sliver of an opening, she saw a bonfire raging, its flames leaping high into the perpetual twilight, casting flickering, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the static dark. And the gods, all of them, hundreds of kami, were gathered, their faces illuminated by the fire, their mouths wide with laughter. Not pained, desperate chuckles, but deep, rolling, genuine peals of joy that echoed off the mountains. They were drinking, their sake cups flashing in the firelight. They were singing, their voices a chaotic but undeniably cheerful chorus. This wasn't a world in mourning. This was a world that had moved on. The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. How could they be so happy? Without her, without the sun. Her grief, her righteous anger that had driven her into this stone womb, suddenly felt cheapened. It was a private misery, it seemed, in a universe that had found a way to celebrate in spite of it. Her ear pressed against the cold stone, she tried to parse the sounds. The music was wild, driven by a frantic, stomping rhythm. It was a sound she'd never heard before, raw and primal. It pulled at something deep inside her, a forgotten instinct to move, to dance. Her curiosity warred with her wounded pride. What could possibly be the source of such untamed joy? Her eyes scanned the crowd, trying to find the center of the commotion. And then she saw it. In the middle of the clearing, a large wooden tub had been overturned, creating a makeshift stage. And upon that stage was Ama-no-Iwato, the goddess of the dawn, mirth, and revelry. But this was an Iwato she had never seen before. Her hair was a wild tangle, her face flushed, her movements utterly uninhibited. She was dancing, stomping her feet on the hollow tub. She created a thunderous, hypnotic beat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The sound burrowed through the rock, through Amaterasu's bones, vibrating in her chest. It was the frantic rhythm she had heard earlier, the one that had almost matched her own panicked heartbeat. Iwato's dance was absurd. It was comical. She kicked her legs, spun in circles, made outrageous faces at the roaring crowd of gods. She was a whirlwind of joyous, shameless energy. and the gods loved it. They howled with laughter, they clapped, they stomped their own feet in time with her beat, creating a symphony of chaos. The sound was deafening, a physical force pushing against the stone door of the cave. Amaterasu found herself captivated, a reluctant spectator to this bizarre, magnetic performance. Then Yuzume's dance began to change. The comical elements fell away, replaced by something older, more powerful. Her movements became less a joke and more a ritual. She began to disrobe, not in a way of seduction, but of liberation. She shed the layers of decorum, of expectation, casting them aside like old skins. With each piece of clothing that fell, the cheering of the gods grew louder, more feverish. This wasn't lustful, it was celebratory. It was the worship of life itself, of the raw, untamed spirit that Yuzume embodied. She danced as the divine feminine incarnate, a force of nature unleashed, and the 800 myriad gods exploded in a single unified roar of pure, unadulterated delight. The sound was so immense, so powerful, it felt as if the high plane of heaven itself was about to crack open. Amaterasu recoiled from the crack in the door, stunned. This was the source of their joy? This undignified display? This madness? The insult was too much to bear. Her world, her order, had been shattered by her brother's monstrous acts. She had hidden herself away in a noble, silent protest, expecting a world to beg for her return. Instead, they'd thrown a party for a stripping dancer. A hot, furious jealousy, an emotion she hadn't felt in centuries, surged through her. She couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. Pushing her mouth to the crack, she shouted, her voice hoarse from disuse, trying to cut through the din. How can you celebrate? How can you laugh and feast when the world is plunged into darkness? When I, Amaterasu, am gone. The music and the laughter outside didn't stop, but it lessened. A voice clear and bright called back. It was Yuzume. We celebrate, she yelled, her voice ringing with a strange, triumphant glee. Because we have found a goddess even more radiant than you, my lady. A being of such light and beauty, your own brilliance pales in comparison. The word struck Amaterasu like a physical blow. A goddess more radiant than her? The Sun Goddess? Impossible. It was a lie. A blatant, ridiculous lie designed to mock her. And yet, the sheer confidence in Yuzume's voice planted a tiny poisonous seed of doubt. What if it wasn't a lie? What if, in her absence, another power had risen? Another source of light? The thought was intolerable. Her pride, the very core of her being, could not let such a challenge stand. She had to see. She had to know who this usurper was. Her hands, trembling with a mixture of anger and a desperate, burning curiosity, pushed against the great stone door. It was heavy, a dead weight that had been her shield and her prison. With a groan of protest, the rock scraped against the ground, opening just a little wider. Not enough for her to step out, but enough to see the clearing properly. Enough to see this supposed new goddess. She peered through the new, wider gap, her eyes scanning the firelit crowd, searching for a beacon of light, a rival sun. And that's when she saw it. It wasn't in the crowd. It was directly in front of her, placed just outside the cave entrance, hanging from the branches of a sacred sakiki tree. It was a mirror, a perfectly polished, 8-sided bronze mirror, the Yata no Kagami. And in its surface, a goddess stared back at her. Amaterasu gasped. Yuzume hadn't been lying. The goddess in the mirror was magnificent. Her face was framed by a halo of the most brilliant, blinding golden light Amaterasu had ever witnessed. It was a light that seemed to pulse with life, a light that promised warmth and growth and hope. It was a light that dwarfed the bonfire, that pushed back the oppressive darkness of the world with its sheer, effortless power. The goddess's eyes held a deep, ancient sorrow, but also an indomitable strength. She was, without question, the most beautiful and powerful being Amaterasu had ever laid eyes on. She was mesmerized, completely captivated by this vision of divine perfection. Who was she? Where had she come from? Slowly, cautiously, drawn by an irresistible magnetic pull, Amaterasu pushed the stone door further open. She leaned out of the cave, wanting to get a closer look at this radiant stranger, this glorious rival. As she moved, the goddess in the mirror moved with her, her expression of awe perfectly matching Amaterasu's own. She was so lost in the reflection, so entranced by the light she was seeing for the first time, that she didn't notice the hulking shadow detaching itself from the side of the cave entrance. She didn't see the god of immense strength, Ama-no-Iwato, who who had been waiting silently, patiently, his muscles coiled like steel springs. She didn't see him until his hand, as large and as strong as a mountain root, shot out and gripped the edge of the stone door. His grip was absolute. The goddess, frozen in her own reflection, felt a tremor run through the stone, a vibration that was not of the earth, but of pure, focused power. The sound that followed was a groan of protest from the very bedrock of the world, the sound of something that was never meant to move being forced to yield. Ama-no-Iwato didn't just pull. He uprooted the darkness. His feet sank into the ground, his back became a mountain range of straining muscle, and with a roar that was both prayer and command, he heaved. The stone door, which 1,000 gods could not have budged, began to slide. It was not a smooth or easy motion. It was a grinding, shrieking agony of rock on rock, a sound that scraped the inside of the skull. Dust and pebbles rained down as the seal, held for so long, was broken. For the gods outside, that terrible noise was the sweetest music they had ever heard. It was the sound of hope being given a voice. Through the ever-widening gap, the light began to leak. At first, it was just a sliver, a blade of pure incandescence that cut through the gloom. But as Amaterasu strained, his entire being poured into this one singular act, the sliver became a spear, then a floodgate. Amaterasu, still captivated by the image in the mirror, was suddenly engulfed in her own brilliance, no longer filtered through a crack, but raw and unrestrained. It was blinding. It was overwhelming. It was the essence of life itself, and it poured out of the cave like a physical substance. The pallid, gray world that had shivered in her absence was instantly, violently, reborn in color. The anemic green of the leaves on the sakiki tree became a deep, lustrous emerald. The dull feathers of the roosters exploded into iridescent blues and fiery reds. The very air, once thin and sharp with cold, became thick and warm and golden. The frost on the ground didn't just melt. It vanished in a hiss of steam, and in its place dormant flowers, starved for warmth, burst open in a riot of impossible hues. The assembled gods, who had been leaning forward in breathless anticipation, were thrown back by the sheer force of the light. They shielded their eyes, not from pain, but from a glory so profound it felt like a physical blow. They had forgotten. In the long, cold darkness, they had forgotten what her full radiance truly felt like. This wasn't just the absence of dark. This was an active, benevolent power that saturated every atom of existence, chasing out shadows, mending what was broken, and affirming life in its most fundamental form. And in the center of it all stood Amaterasu. She was no longer peering out. Amaterasu, with a final earth-shaking heave, had thrown the great stone door aside, where it landed with a cataclysmic boom that shook the plains of heaven. The path was clear. Another god, feud, rushed forward, holding not a weapon but a rope. This was no ordinary rope. It was a shimanawa, a sacred cord woven from rice straw, a marker of holy ground. With swift, reverent motions, he stretched it across the entrance of the cave. It was a boundary, a line drawn between the world of light and the memory of darkness. It was a divine declaration. Asterisk, you may not return. This sanctuary of sorrow is now sealed forever. Asterisk. Amaterasu finally lowered her hands from her face, her eyes adjusting to her own magnificent light. She looked at the world she had abandoned. She saw the tears of joy on the faces of the gods. She saw the vibrant life surging back into the land. And she saw the mirror still held before her. In that moment, she understood the deception. She understood the dance, the laughter, the clever ruse. But there was no anger, only a profound, soul-deep realization. The radiant goddess in the mirror, the one whose beauty and power had so captivated her that she had risked everything to see more, was herself. The source of all that wonder, all that light, all that life-giving warmth was not some rival, not some newcomer. It was her. It had always been her. Her grief had blinded her to her own nature. Her sorrow had made her forget her own power. The mirror hadn't just tricked her. It had shown her the truth she had forgotten inside that cold, dark cave. It had reminded her who she was. This mirror, the Yata no Kagami, would from that moment on be enshrined as one of the 3 great imperial regalia of Japan. A sacred treasure, a symbol not of vanity, but of ultimate truth and self-knowledge. A cheer erupted from the gods, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief that rolled across the heavens. Yuzume, her dance finished, laughed a laugh that sounded like 1,000 wind chimes. Omikami, the architect of the plan, allowed a rare, deep smile to cross his face. Tajikareo, the god of strength, stood breathing heavily, his task complete, a silent pillar of victory. The world was saved. The sun had returned. Harmony was restored. But as the celebration swelled, a different feeling began to ripple through the divine assembly. The joy was real, the relief immense, but the restoration was not yet complete. The light was back, but the wound that had caused its departure remained. The reason for the goddess's grief, the source of the chaos, the one whose selfish rage had nearly plunged the universe into eternal night, was still among them. Slowly, the joyous faces turned serious. The laughter died down, replaced by a low, determined murmur. One by one, the gods turned their eyes from their luminous, restored queen. They looked past her, their gazes hardening, their expressions shifting from reverence to judgment. Their collective stare fell upon a single point, upon a single god who had stood silently at the edge of the crowd, watching the entire spectacle unfold. There, stripped of his power, his fury now replaced with the cold dread of consequence, stood Susanoo no Mikoto, the god of storms. The party was over. The time for trickery and celebration had passed. Now it was time for justice. The 800 myriad gods of the heavenly plane, their faces grim in the brilliant, unforgiving light of the sister he had wronged, began to close in. Susanoo stood frozen, the laughter dying in his throat. The heat of Amaterasu's light was no longer warm and life-giving. It was a searing, accusatory glare. The gods, who moments before had been his audience, were now his judges, his jury, and his executioners. Their faces, once masks of mirth, were now carved from stone, their eyes holding the cold fury of a cosmos thrown into chaos. There was no escape. He was an island, and the tide of divine wrath was rising. What becomes of a god who breaks the sacred order? What is the price for plunging creation into darkness, for terrifying the source of all light, for defiling the very fabric of heaven? Susanoo was about to find out. This was not a squabble between siblings anymore. This was a trial. His rampage, his divine tantrum, had been catalogued. Every transgression was an entry in a ledger that now demanded to be balanced. First, there was the desecration of the sacred rice paddies. He had trampled the fields Amaterasu so carefully tended, breaking the miniature dikes, symbols of order and cultivation. This was not just vandalism. It was an attack on civilization itself, an assault on the very idea of nurturing life. It was a declaration that chaos was superior to order. Then there was the ultimate act of defilement, the flaying of the heavenly piebald horse, an animal sacred to Amaterasu, and casting its bloody corpse into her sacred weaving hall. This was an act of unthinkable pollution. It was a violation of the sacred, a mockery of purity, and a direct, terrifying threat against his sister. It was this act that had shattered her spirit, that had driven the sun from the sky. It was this sin, above all others, that had brought the universe to the brink of eternal night. The gods didn't need to speak the charges aloud. Susanoo could feel them, pressing in on him from all sides. He could see them reflected in the eyes of the kami who surrounded him. The god of storms, the master of the wild winds and raging seas, was now trapped in a silent, suffocating stillness. The verdict was swift, delivered not by a single voice, but by a collective will, a unified judgment of the heavens. He would be made to pay, not with a simple apology but with a piece of himself. The punishment began with a profound, symbolic humiliation. The gods seized him, his divine strength useless against their combined might. They held him down, and with ritualistic precision, they began to pluck the hairs from his magnificent beard, one by one. His beard, a symbol of his power and virility, was stripped from him, leaving his chin raw and exposed. But they were not finished. They then moved to his hands and feet, and with tools of divine judgment, they pried the nails from his fingers and his toes. Each one was an agony, a stripping away of his physical form, a reminder that the body of a god could be unmade. He who had brought terror was now subjected to a meticulous personal pain. He was being dismantled piece by piece. Next came the reparations. He was ordered to provide 1,000 tables of offerings as atonement, a mountain of goods, of ritual objects, of treasures, all to purify the heavens of the filth he had unleashed. It was a fine so immense it could bankrupt a lesser deity, a physical representation of the cosmic debt he had incurred. His pride, his power, his possessions, all were being systematically stripped away. But even this was not enough. The plucking of his beard, the removal of his nails, the crippling fines, these were punishments. They were not the solution. The problem was Susanoo himself. His very presence in the heavenly plane was a source of instability, a constant threat of chaos. As long as he remained, the harmony Amaterasu had restored would be fragile, a temporary peace always at risk of being shattered by his next outburst. And so the final sentence was passed, the one from which there was no appeal: banishment. He was to be cast out, expelled from the high heavenly plane of Takamagara forever. He would be exiled to the mortal world, the central land of reed plains, or perhaps even to Nanokuni, the land of roots, the underworld itself. He was no longer welcome among the gods. The force of their collective will was a physical thing, a gale stronger than any storm he had ever commanded. It lifted him from his feet, stripping him of his celestial footing. The brilliant light of heaven began to recede, the faces of the gods he had known his entire existence blurring into a distant, unforgiving constellation. He was falling, not a gentle descent, but a violent, uncontrolled plummet through the layers of existence. He tumbled through the floating bridge of heaven, the very path he had once walked with such arrogance. He fell past the clouds, past the sky, the divine essence of his being burning away like a meteor entering a new atmosphere. The air grew thick, heavy with moisture and the scent of soil, of decay, of life and death, the smells of the mortal world. He crashed to the earth in a cataclysm of displaced air and splintered trees, landing near the headwaters of the high river in the province of Izumo. The impact left a crater, a scar on the land that mirrored the wound in his pride. He lay there for a long time, the raw earth of the world of men cold against his cheek. The sky above was a flat, unfeeling blue. There was no divine light here, no shimmering palaces, no familiar faces, only the rustle of leaves and the cry of unfamiliar birds. He was a god, yes, but a god with no kingdom, no worshippers, no purpose. He was stripped, shamed, and utterly alone. He pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the fall and the punishment. He looked at his hands, his raw, nail-less fingers. He touched his bare chin. He was a shadow of his former self. The great storm god Susanoo no Mikoto was now just Susanoo, an exile. He began to walk, with no destination in mind, following the path of the river as it snaked through the dense, ancient forest. The world of mortals was wild, chaotic in a way he had never truly appreciated. It was not the explosive, passionate chaos he embodied, but a slow, grinding chaos of survival, of predator and prey, of growth and rot. As he walked along the riverbank, his despair a heavy cloak upon his shoulders, he saw something strange floating downstream. At first he dismissed it, but then another appeared, and another. They were chopsticks. Used chopsticks bobbing in the current. A simple, mundane object. But their presence here, in this untamed wilderness, meant only one thing. Someone was upstream. Someone was eating. And where there were people, there was civilization. And where there was civilization, there was a story. A flicker of something. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity, stirred within him for the first time since his fall. He had been the destroyer of order. He had been the agent of chaos. But now, in this new world, this mortal realm, perhaps his story wasn't over. Perhaps this was not an end, but a different, more difficult beginning. He looked upstream into the deepening shadows of the forest, and for the first time, the god of storms chose to walk toward an unknown future, rather than rage against the past. A new chapter of his legend was about to be written, not in the heavens but here in the world of men and monsters. Wandering the earth, Susanoo felt the sting of mortality in a way he never had as a god of the high plane of heaven. The wind bit at him not as a subject, but as a force of nature. The rain chilled him not as a creation, but as a simple cold reality. He was an exile, stripped of his power and his pride, and in that humbling, he began to see the world not as a playground to be broken, but as a fragile, beautiful thing to be protected. His journey took him to the land of Izumo, a place of ancient mountains and deep rivers. And it was there, by the side of the high river, that he heard a sound he had never truly paid attention to before, the sound of weeping. He followed it to a small house, where he found an elderly couple holding their daughter, their bodies shaking with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the space around them. Susanoo, the god who had once terrorized heaven with his own selfish rage, now felt a flicker of something else, empathy. He asked them why they cried. The old man looked up, his eyes hollowed out by years of fear. He explained that they once had 8 daughters, as beautiful as the 8 islands of Japan. But every year, a monstrous creature emerged from the mountains, the Ama-no-Iwato, the 8-forked serpent. Each year, it demanded one of their daughters as a sacrifice. And now they were down to their last, the beautiful Susanoo. Her time was near. The old man described the beast, and even Susanoo, a god of chaos, felt a chill. The Orochi was a creature of impossible scale. Its body was long enough to cover 8 hills and 8 valleys. Moss and trees grew on its back, and its belly was perpetually stained with blood. It had 8 heads and 8 tails, and its eyes glowed like crimson lanterns in the dark. It was not just a monster. It was a living cataclysm, a force of destruction that made Susanoo's own heavenly tantrums look like a child's fit. In that moment, Susanoo saw a reflection of his own worst impulses given monstrous form, and he knew what he had to do. This wasn't about glory or power. It was about atonement. He turned to the old man. "Give me your daughter's hand in marriage," he declared, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "And I will slay this beast for you." The parents, seeing the divine fire in his eyes, agreed without hesitation. Susanoo then transformed the terrified Susanoo into a simple comb, which he tucked safely into his hair. His first act as a hero was one of protection, not destruction. Then he set his plan in motion. He ordered the couple to brew 8 enormous vats of the strongest, most refined sake, and to place them on a platform surrounded by a fence with 8 gates. Susanoo, the god of storms, was about to fight a monster not with brute force alone, but with cunning. He would use the serpent's own gluttony against it. They waited. The earth began to tremble. A foul wind, smelling of iron and decay, swept through the valley. And then the Ama-no-Iwato appeared. It was more terrifying than any description could capture. 8 massive heads on 8 serpentine necks swayed through the air, their forked tongues tasting the wind, their 8 pairs of red eyes scanning the landscape. The monster slithered toward the offering, its immense body crushing trees and scouring the earth. It saw the 8 vats of sake, and each of its 8 heads, driven by an insatiable thirst, plunged into a vat. The serpent drank and drank, the potent liquor dulling its senses, until finally the great beast, drunk and disoriented, fell into a deep stuporous sleep. That was Susanoo's moment. He drew his 10-span sword, the Tatsuka no Tsurugi, and leaped into action. The battle was a whirlwind of divine fury and monstrous rage. He moved like a storm, his blade a flash of lightning. He severed the first head, and black, venomous blood sprayed into the air, turning the high river red. He cut the second, the third, the fourth. The remaining heads awoke, thrashing and roaring, spitting fire and poison. But Susanoo was relentless. He was fighting not just a monster, but the ghost of his own past, the embodiment of the chaos he once unleashed. He dodged and weaved, his every strike precise and powerful, until 7 heads lay severed on the ground. Finally, he brought his sword down on the central largest head, silencing the beast forever. But the work was not done. To ensure the creature could never rise again, he began to hack its massive body to pieces, starting with the tails. As he brought his sword down on the 4th tail, the blade struck something impossibly hard. There was a loud crack, and his own divine sword chipped. Puzzled, Susanoo sliced the tail open, and there, nestled within the flesh of the monstrous serpent, was a sword. It was magnificent, radiating a pure, cold light, a blade of unparalleled beauty and sharpness. This was the Ama-no-Iwato no Tsurugi, the sword of the gathering clouds of heaven, later to be known as the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. Holding the blade, Susanoo understood. This was the final piece of his redemption. He had not just conquered a monster. He had drawn a symbol of order and divine power from the very heart of chaos. He knew what he had to do. He journeyed back to the high plane of heaven, not as a rampaging exile, but as a humbled hero. He presented the sacred sword to his sister, Amaterasu. It was more than a gift. It was an apology, a peace offering, and a symbol of his newfound loyalty. Amaterasu accepted it, and with that act, the deepest wound in the divine family was finally healed. And this is where the myth transcends simple storytelling and becomes the bedrock of a nation. Amaterasu, the Sun Goddess, is known as the divine ancestor of the Imperial House of Japan, the world's oldest continuous hereditary monarchy. The lineage of the emperor is said to trace directly back to her, and the symbols of that divine right are the three sacred treasures of Japan. The first is the mirror, Yata no Kagami, which lured Amaterasu from the cave, representing wisdom and the ability to know oneself. The second is the jewel, Yasakani no Magatama, worn by the goddess Ama-no-Iwato, representing benevolence and compassion. And the third is the sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which Susanoo pulled from the serpent, representing the valor and strength of a true ruler. These three items, the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, are not just artifacts. They are the physical embodiment of this entire epic. They represent the core virtues needed to lead and to live. They are the legacy of Amaterasu's light, Susanoo's redemption, and the collective effort of the gods. The story of Amaterasu hiding in the cave is reenacted, in a way, throughout Japanese history. It has become a powerful metaphor for the nation itself overcoming periods of darkness, war, disaster, isolation, and re-emerging into the light, not through the action of a single hero, but through the combined efforts of the community, through innovation, art, and a shared will to bring back the sun. The tale of the Sun Goddess is more than just a creation myth. It's a profound exploration of the human and divine condition. It teaches us about the devastating consequences of unchecked ego and the immense power of forgiveness. It shows us that light and darkness, creation and destruction, Amaterasu and Susanoo, are not separate forces, but two sides of the same coin, a necessary balance in the universe. It reminds us that even when the world goes dark, when the sun itself seems to have abandoned us, hope is not lost. It tells us that light can be coaxed back not with force, but with wisdom, with community, with joy, and sometimes with a little bit of divine ridiculous dancing. It is a story that assures us that no matter how deep the cave or how dark the night, the sun can and will rise again.